Okay.
Okay, so first of all, tell me your name and spell it and what your official title is.
Okay. Jay Tutchton. It's Tutchton, and I'm General Counsel for WildEarth Guardians.
Okay, and if you could talk about WildEarth Guardians and, you know, as an organization, its goals and what you do exactly.
Okay. Well, Guardians is a fairly typical mid-sized environmental group based in the western U.S., works to preserve public lands, wildlife, and what I have done for Guardians is help organize their legal program and the lawsuits they file, and principally on behalf of endangered species. The reason that we've prioritized endangered species is, of all the environmental problems we're facing, it's the least remediable if we get it wrong. The trite way is extinction is forever. But it's true. You know, you can clean up a river, you can allow forests to grow back or areas to recover from overgrazing or even strip mining with reclamation. You can't bring a species back. And so that's why we focus so much on extinction and trying to prevent it.
Okay, and what kind of outreach do you have?
Guardians, well, we have a newsletter. We have, a bunch of web stuff. I'm not very sophisticated with the internet, and other people do that kind of work. But, your standard Facebook web page and print materials to inform our members and supporters. We have parties, basically, at least 2-3 times a year, and invite all our members, have a speaker. That sort of outreach.
Are you a 501?
We're a 501c3. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And kind of explain what that means, just for the layperson.
Well, 501c3, it's an acronym that comes from the IRS code. It basically means people are allowed to give you money and write it off on their taxes. That's the real reason to be a 501c3. You can be a charity and do charitable works without being a 501c3. But if you want your donors to be able to write off their donations, you have to comply with the IRS code. It does limit the amount of lobbying you can do. If you do too much lobbying, you cannot be a 501c3. But that's not a problem for Guardians.
Okay, and so how did you start off on environmental rights, animal rights, that kind of thing?
Oh. Well, it could be a long answer.
That's okay. It can be a really long. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Well, I suspect my start is fairly common. I grew up here in Colorado, actually like about a mile from where we're sitting. And it was a dramatically different place. All these suburbs were fields. The Orchard Road didn't connect to the freeway. And so most of my childhood was spent watching the places I played in or enjoyed or just loved basically destroyed by development, sprawl, whatever you want to call it. And that sort of got me interested in protecting those places. And I, like a lot of college kids, you bounce around, you're interested in a lot of different things, but I would always come back to working on the environment. And went to law school really so I could be a better environmental activist. And again, when you get out of law school, you need a job to pay back your loans. And so I didn't immediately get a job in environmental activism, but it was always the thing I wanted to do as soon as I could. And so I came to environmental activism first. And animal rights later. I actually grew up a hunter. When I first started working on environmental issues, I worked with actually a house set for one of the founders of Earth First, and he convinced me the most ethical way to eat meat, if you were going to eat meat, was to kill it yourself. and accept that responsibility. And so that ramped up my hunting quite a bit if you're trying to kill what you eat, basically. He lived in Alaska, so it was much more possible for him. But I thought he had a really good point, both on a personal responsibility level, also on an animal quality of life level, because, an elk or a goose, until you shot it, had a relatively nice life, and then a really horrible day, versus a cow or a pig or a chicken, which had ate whatever, not more than a year of life under really crummy conditions, and then an even worse day. And so that if you were going to eat meat, that it was more ethical to kill it yourself and take that responsibility. What changed me was I kept thinking about this is, and this is how I came to animal rights from just being a hunter, is first off, no matter how careful you are, you will make mistakes as a hunter, and something will get wounded. I've seen even the best shots I know screw up. And so suffering will result. You just can't say that suffering is not going to result. The other things, though, are it's simply not sustainable. There's all sorts of environmental harm that flows from eating meat that you just have to recognize. But I guess the main thought for me at the time was you don't kill and eat your friends. And what really brought it home to me was my daughter, we were observing a herd of elk once, and said, let's get out and look at them a little closer. And she didn't understand the difference between just observing elk or going hunting for elk. She knew I hunted for elk, and she kind of had a tantrum and said, Dad, if you're going to hurt those elk, I'm not getting out of the car. And I said, no, I'm not going to hurt the elk. I like the elk. And she's like, but you kill the elk. And it's sort of that dichotomy revealed that there was something wrong with saying, I love wildlife, I'm trying to save it, but at the same time I'm killing it, and particularly when it's completely unnecessary. So that sort of opened the door to becoming more an animal rights / environmental activist. But there's sort of three rationales. One is it's environmental. Meat production is not sustainable. I mean, the only reason we can have 7 billion people on Earth is that most of them can't or afford to eat meat. So that it's just not sustainable. It has horrible environmental consequences. Overgrazing, captive CAFOs, I think they contribute something like 19% of global warming comes from animal agriculture. And the last of it, I think that ultimately it's at least for me, it's not ethical. And I don't think we should eat sentient beings if we don't have to. And then it's probably not healthy, which you go sort of, why give yourself heart disease and cancer to provide money to an industry that you despise? So.
Well, and I think you're right about that. I mean, there's a lot of scientific evidence to prove that. I mean, a little bit of meat may be okay, but if you just eat tons of it, as you're pointing out, it can make you really sick. So.
Yeah. No.
And that is, that's certainly a viable reason.
Yeah. Well, at least it became more explainable for me. And, again, as I mentioned, one of my touchstones is explain it to a kid. And if you can't explain it to a kid, there's some logical leaps in there that are probably not, warranted. And so at least if you're going to work to protect the environment, work to protect endangered species and animals generally, a vegan lifestyle was much more explainable. So that's how I sort of came to that position.
What's the difference between vegan and vegetarian?
Dairy, mainly.
Dairy?
Yeah, I think, again, it's always a spectrum. And I view it as just do the best you can. I don't get religious or doctrinaire about it. Like if some vegans wouldn't have leather shoes, but I have leather shoes that were a gift, and they've got recycled soles, so they're helping reduce plastic and stuff. And I'm not going to throw them away because I'm offended by the leather, but I'll use them. But a really pure vegan would not do that, I had a leather jacket. I gave it to a homeless guy because I didn't need it, and I have a jacket made out of cotton. So you sort of do the best you can. But the distinction most people would say is that vegetarians still use dairy and eggs, and that's probably the most common distinction.
Yeah, because it's not on the list, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Because I have a niece who's a vegan and a sister-in-law who's vegetarian. So, and I'm like, okay, because I don't eat a lot of meat because my digestive system can't take it, but I'm not a vegetarian per se. But
yeah, but I see how
I see the point. I see the point. When you did you work at the University of Denver Environmental Law Clinic?
Yeah, I did actually.
Could you start with that, and then we'll go into
Sure.
how you came to file the petition, because the story about your dog is kind of cool.
Okay. Well, so I actually was the first employee of the Denver Environmental Law Clinic. It was founded by a guy named Mark Hughes, and he had started a small nonprofit called Earth Law, which got a contract to run an environmental law clinic at the University of Denver. And Mark hired me to start up running the clinic. And that was way back in like 1995. I bounced around a few times in the couple decades since. I worked for the National Wildlife Federation for a while. I came back to DU. At times, DU's clinic was associated with the Center for Biological Diversity and Earth Justice, and so I worked for both those organizations briefly, but really the whole time I was helping or running the DU Environmental Law Clinic till about 2007, and then Mike Harris took over. So I've been involved in DU Clinic forever. For me, writing about stuff is not as interesting as doing the stuff, and so law professors tend to go on a tenure track where you need to write about stuff, and I just preferred to do the stuff and let somebody else figure out what it ultimately meant, and that was just more my personality. And so I looked around and picked one of my favorite clients and said, I'm going to go to work for that client, and that's when I became general counsel at WildEarth Guardians. The parrot petition. Do you want me to talk about the parrot petition?
Well, first tell me, how's it? And I'm going to talk to Mike Harris too on Wednesday, which I really look forward to.
Yeah.
And how does the law, the environmental law clinic, get its clients?
Oh,
do they come to you? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean it varies a little bit over time, but basically they come to us. Once you have started working with the client, you might have an idea that will help your client. So oftentimes it's a phone call or an email, hey, can you help me with this? But after you've developed that initial relationship, you'd say, look, I know this client is concerned about animal rights. I see an issue where there's something we could do legally. I'm going to call them up and see if they're interested. So it becomes often a two-way street. The clinic is open to anyone who walks in the door, though. I used to tease, industry folks because they would always complain that, and it's easy to get them to shut up about the complaint that, well, why is this university running something that's helping environmental groups sue us and cost us money? I said, well, fine. If you want to be represented in court by a bunch of law students, go ahead, call us up. But, they can buy K Street law firms. And so why would they accept free representation from a bunch of law firms when they can get the best that money can buy? So it's technically open to anybody with an environmental issue, the people who come to the door often are public interest types who don't have any other options.
Okay. Now, how did the parrot petition start? How did this whole thing start?
Okay.
I mean, this
Yeah.
is a conundrum, I tell you. Kids, I mean, I started this out doing a little simple documentary on the Hyacinth Macaw, the red-fronted macaw, and the blue-throated, all of which are endangered. And I've always wondered, why is a Hyacinth Macaw $10,000 and you know, these other species are not quite so much? And I was looking at, you know, I have a red-fronted macaw I rescued. He's minus a toe. I have special needs birds that would never survive.